Hey everybody, Brian Von VA back at it again with another set of D&D stories. Today we're going to be talking about, in D&D, why would players choose to use lower damage weapons like a dagger or a club? Yeah, let's talk about that. So many good reasons, many of them counterintuitive. For example, my bard carries 6 slings and 40 bullets at all times. Why? Well, because slings are cheap, they're small and have negligible weight, and are the only ranged bludgeoning weapon. If our party ever runs into skeletons or some other creature that resists piercing or slashing damage, I start passing out the slings so we can still take them out at range. My monk in another game whittled his own wooden flute to use as a club in combat. Why? Well, because it added flavor, and mechanically, after about 5th level, all monk weapons do a d6 or better damage dice, the same as the monk's hands. He has to use a monk weapon to get his flurry of blows extra attacks. The club is mainly for hitting things I don't want to touch with my hands. My friend had a rogue who fought with 2 daggers instead of a rapier and a dagger. Why? Well, he specialized in disguise infiltration, and daggers worked better with his disguises. He sacrificed dropping from a d8 to a d4, but he did most of his damage with his dex bonus and backstab dice. Attacking with his offhand gave him an extra chance to hit and use his backstab dice each round. If he hit on his first attack, he might save his bonus action for something else, but he wanted to make sure he almost always delivered the backstab damage. So he liked having the flexibility the dual knife fighter motif afforded. I've never built it, but I was interested in optimizing a character for massive damage with a household object. Maybe a pepper grinder, or a large hat pin, or a holy figurine. I was just going to reskin a club or a dagger for the damage dice. Why? Well, because the humor comes from using something that looks relatively harmless, hence the small damage dice, but due to the stat bonus, fighting style, backstab bonus, maybe feat or even magic bonus, it still does impressive damage. In short, DPS is one thing, but there are many other ways to measure and enjoy your character's effects on the encounters. I play a half-orc barbarian named Gil, who generally fights with a great axe d12 slashing. Last session, my rotten DM pitted the party against a series of flying creatures, who conveniently remained out of great axe range. No problem, I always build my characters with a ranged weapon option. My barb is proficient in crossbows. He could use a heavy crossbow, d10 piercing, a light crossbow, d8 piercing, or a hand crossbow, d6 piercing. But then I remembered, my barbarian wouldn't use a freaking crossbow! He's a barbarian! He's not the type of guy to carefully aim a projectile weapon in a fight! I play my character honestly. He carries a crossbow around as a hunting weapon, and he may use it in certain situations. We set an ambush for a manticore and the crossbow came in handy, but the instant he enters a rage, he throws the crossbow to the ground, he grabs his smashy-slashy, because that's what he would do. So what did I do about the flying creatures? Well, as it turns out, he also carries a javelin, d6 piercing, my personal throwing weapon of preference. Of course, that's a character-driven choice, right? You have to play honestly, and honestly, he would use a javelin, even in a rage. But he would only rarely use a crossbow. I'll just have to accept the reality of doing less damage. Oh, wait though, not so fast! The crossbow does d8 damage, but the attack and damage modifiers are based in dex, which is +1. The javelin does d6 damage, with modifiers based in strength +3. So let's run the numbers. Crossbow attack, dun-dun-dun-dun, +3. Dex plus proficiency, damage equals d8 +1. Javelin attack, +5. Strength plus proficiency, damage d6 +3. The average roll on a d8 is 4.5. The min damage I can do with the crossbow is 2, and the max is 9. The average, 5.5. The average roll on a d6 is 3.5. The min damage I can do with the javelin is 4, and the max is 9. The average, 6.5, baby. I actually do more damage with the javelin. Obviously, there are many different character builds in which this wouldn't make sense, but that's the math with my character. Counterintuitive though it is, it makes more sense to use the throwing spear than a crossbow. Technically, I was thinking if you're a barbarian entering a rage, the first thing you're going to be doing is either throwing your main-handed weapon in a total pissed-off fury, or picking up the nearest halfling and launching it at the damn stratosphere in an attempt to kill one of the flying pricks. But alas, I'm not your barbarian. Thank God. At least in 5th edition, every extra feature usually lowers the damage die 1 step, and each negative trait raises it, such as being heavy, two-handed, or martial because it imposes restrictions on how or who can use them. The highest damage is usually for the martial or heavy two-handed weapons without reach. Next ones are the ones with reach. Then you have your typical long sword, which is versatile, so it can be used with 2 hands for 1 step below a greatsword, or with 1 hand for 2 steps. On the other extreme, you have daggers, finesse, light, throwable. That means you can have 1 in each hand, can choose to use dex or strength, and rogues get an extra damage with them, and you use them as range attacks in a pinch. The next weapon up would be a short sword, also light and finesse but not throwable. It's also martial, but several classes that normally get simple weapons can use them, such as a monk or a rogue. Then the rapier, which is finesse but not light, also martial but usable by rogues and bards. So you can't normally use 1 in each hand, so it's 1 die better than the short sword. It's only worse than a long sword if you intend to switch between 1 and 2 hands. A club is probably the exception. It's arguably the worst weapon, at least you can use 2 at once, but it's also the cheapest, and arguably, anyone can pick up almost anything and use it as a club instead of an improvised weapon. It's also good to give cannon fodder NPCs. On daggers. One time, recently, our party arrived at the desk of a devil asking us to draw some blood to sign a contract. He asked, "I trust each of you have a dagger." Everyone looked at each other, generally implying no. My rogue perked up and began producing a vast collection of daggers that he'd pocketed over the last 2 years without anyone really noticing because nobody else cares about daggers. He handed 1 out to each person. The acid dagger for you. You can use the orcish dagger. Here's the healing needle, the vampiric knife, the parry dagger, the thief's dagger. The dagger teleports back to its sheath. The thief's teleports again. Damn it, just take it. Teleports. All right, fine, I'll keep this one. By the time everyone had been given their dagger, the group had decided not to sign the blood contract after all, which was a very good call. Daggers are easy to conceal and fairly subtle to draw, so they're useful for shifty rogue types to carry. But a standard dagger won't be used as a primary weapon unless there are no other options or if it's for flavor. I've also used them occasionally for some desperate field surgery with varying successes. What are you, Canadian, doing a war crime trying to, fix somebody up with a dagger? No, get out of here. Go home. Well, let's look at some of the more popular weapons, at least in the games I've been in. Bows. Arrows typically weigh 0.15 pounds, crossbow bolts are a bit lighter at 0.1. Most real-world quivers meant to be worn carry between 10 and 20 arrows. Well, what happens when you run out? I've always counted shots as a player, and as a DM I expect my players to as well. Even if they recover them from dead foes, they'll inevitably lose some to breakage or just otherwise be unrecoverable. So at this point, they either need to buy or scrounge more, or they'll end up empty. In that case, an arming sword or short sword make a good backup weapon, just like in real history. Also handy if some rude fellow sneaks past the tank to ambush the archers at close range. Let's look at some others. For those of you who do not have the visual aid here, a lot of these things are great axes and halberds, as well as spears and long polearm type weapons. There are lots of damage, and they're pretty much great and fine for fighting in larger areas, but in smaller corridors, well, a long spear won't do so well in a narrow corridor. Or what if you're in town on errands? If you're walking around town in all your gear, it's the same as walking around town in full combat rig, as you can see or maybe not see through the visual aid here presented. The guardsmen will be pretty curious about what you're doing. Usually only the people in full kit are guardsmen themselves or occupying soldiers. And yes, as a DM, I will confront players with narrow corridors, obstacles to climb over, and suspicious guardsmen. Besides which weapons that stab, slash, or bash better are heavier and more expensive. There are other reasons as well. Some weapons allow you to control the battlefield in ways that others don't. If you're not much of a damage dealer anyway, a whip might be a good option to set up foes to make them easier for your buddies to kill. And finally, some of us are just role players, not role players. I rarely choose weapons based purely on damage alone, but on what sort of weapon my character would genuinely use. What good is a greatsword if your character just isn't the sort of person who'd use one? Maybe she's a sword and board fighter, maybe she prefers spears, maybe she's a necromancer who uses the undead as her primary weapon with no need to carry around a cumbersome hunk of pointy steel. Part of the reason lies with DMs themselves. Now allow me to explain. In a world where you never have to worry about running out of arrows, the lowly sling is pathetic. On the other hand, if running out of ammo is an actual thing, then having a weapon which has an essentially unlimited ammo, pick up a rock, use and sling, is pretty badass. Now sure, it doesn't do a lot of damage, but the advantage is unlimited ammo and ease of concealability. But that's only true if your DM makes those things a priority. The same is true of knives, whips, clubs, and the like. Now, I'm not saying your DM has to be an ammo or weapon upkeep Nazi to make those alternative choices sexy, but he or she does at least have to make those kinds of issues relevant. If they're not, about the only reasons anyone would ever gravitate to those kinds of lesser weapons has to do with roleplay flavor. Try it and see. Just as an experiment, I guarantee you that the first time your archer runs out of ammo, he's going to run out and buy a backup weapon that doesn't suffer from that limitation, though said archer will probably whine for a bit at first at the unfairness of it all if he's used to you letting him play in ammo god mode up to that point. Same thing holds true with 6-foot-long swords and 8-foot-long polearms that are impossible to hide. If you're on an adventure where stealth actually matters beyond what you roll on the D20, and given that it's kinda hard to sneak through town with weapons sticking off of you like a clockwork porcupine, yeah, a knife or a club makes a lot of sense. Those kinds of overlooked weapons are actually incredible. Unfortunately, not many DMs set the table in such a way that they ever get a chance to shine. We could also make the argument, as there was a previous story stating that slings have blunt range damage, and, of course, you have to also think about how most historical figures are always presented with swords as a heroic weapon. So, if you want the masterful DM to be super grandeur, everyone must have a legendary weapon of massive stature, not the lowly little dagger, which is sad. Well, there was one character I did play briefly where I played him as a tank, but also as heavy utility, and for that he was actually using a whip, which is pretty weak in damage, 1d4, but the benefits were finesse and reach. So, he was a fighter with Battle Master. High stats were Dex and Con to stay on the front lines. Light armor for Dex, shield in one hand, whip in the other. The DM was confused why I was so adamant about a whip and was like, well, it has reach, so you cannot really strike things at your face. But the way I saw it, if things are in my face, they're not in the face of my party. That's a good tank. Things didn't start kicking in until I got to level 3 and the DM realized my plan. I would face tank things, and anything that would get out of my face, I had a whip for them. The party had a rogue, and he certainly benefited the most from my antics. So I had a shield in one hand, whip in the other, leather armor, and high dex and con. I took dueling to add a +2 damage to my whip, so now it was 1d4 +2 +4. Dex. Not too bad. Other fighters can do a lot better, I hear people say. But I pushed being a damage dealer out of my mind when I made this character. His sole purpose was to be a beating bag and a heavy annoyance. Plus, when you're leveling up, you eventually come across delightful magical items, such as the flaming whip I got, which made it 1d4 +1d4 fire +5. Oh, that's looking better. But then it gets even better. I took Battle Master, and now I had a delightful thing called superiority die. 4 per long or short rest to be exact, and because we had 2 warlocks in the party, we were big fans of short rests, which meant gaining back my superiority die, which meant I could be more liberal with my die use. I think you get where this is going. So now with my reach weapon, I often ignored what was in my face and used my reach weapon to trip or disarm foes so that my party could dismantle them, trip them for advantage for our rogue, or disarm a menacing orc holding a 2-handed great axe that will bring a lot of pain. Plus, whenever I used my superiority die, I would now add 1d8 to the damage often for my combat maneuvers, making the hit do 2d4 plus 6 plus 1d8 plus DC versus my extra annoyance of trip or disarm or push DC 15 at 5th level. So, not only was I dishing out respectable damage, my bread and butter came with the extra added advantage I often gave my party. Nearby cliff, I used my whip with my push attack to throw them off of it. Double-handed biggie, disarm. The rogue and eldritch knight going after me, but before my enemy, trip attack for advantage. With a +7 to hit just off proficiency and score, I was sitting pretty good at being a tank with a delightful battle control twist. I would not, nor could I, trade my reach weapon for anything else because no other one-handed weapon had reach and finesse that really changed the encounters as stated before. With 2 warlocks in the party, spending my die was not a huge concern for me. The whip, the tiny 1d4 weapon, made so many things possible. It's not always about the damage of the weapon. Sometimes it's all about how you use it. Ladies, that's what she said. Now that I've been talking about him, I'm thinking of maybe bringing him out of retirement. You know what? This kind of makes me think of using a Belmont in D&D. Eventually, your character can and should get a whip that would be something superior to a normal whip, not just magical in nature, but maybe something that could crush an undead, or a Vorpal whip that could go ahead and kill something not of this plane. Just an idea for a future DM. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and of course, let us know in the comments below what kind of weapons that you use that is lower damage and kind of inconspicuous amongst the other big boys, and why you would choose to use it. We love you all. Please be safe, be happy, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.